Hello, my name is Laura Burkhardt, and I am here with Samuel Henderson, and he is a beyond fantastic photographer, and I mean that with lots of smiley faces and exclamation points. I absolutely adore him. But he's going to be talking with us today about yoga photography and his background, and just giving us some tips, things like that, as to what we can do with our own cameras, or who to seek out, what to look for if you're actually wanting to hire a professional photographer. So Samuel, would you please just introduce yourself? I mean, we know your name now, but like just tell us a little bit about you and your background and etc.
Hi, my name is Sam. Yeah, I've been practicing yoga for a few years now, and been taking pictures pretty much since I was 16 years old. So I grew up with a family of photographers, and my surfing world kind of led into yoga. And after I did my teacher training, that connected me with a lot of great people that wanted photographs. So all of that kind of fit into my love and passion for photography. And then being able to be behind the camera and direct yogis for their businesses. So that's kind of how I got into yoga photography.
What do you mostly like to shoot? What is your favorite landscapes, or is it more in studio? I think it is landscapes, but or what is the content that you normally like to shoot?
Well, my whole life is based pretty much around nature and the water. So landscape photography is big, a lot of ocean photography, water photography, and then the yoga kind of just grew out of that, and it allows me to kind of enjoy a hike with somebody, go to a beautiful location, let them kind of do their practice, and I work with what their goals are, and then with the scenery around me.
Mm-hmm. And so go ahead.
No, go ahead.
So what actually drew you to yoga photography more so than something else? I know you do nature, you do other things, but what actually inspired you to work with yoga teachers?
Pretty much all of them that I have met have been absolutely wonderful people. They're great to hang out with. So that's definitely very enjoyable. I've always been really, the idea of like body awareness, both externally and internally, of how like your body, its form and its position, has always fascinated me. So yoga kind of led right into that, the health benefits of it, and to do a shoot with somebody and helps me make them feel really good about themselves and create some beautiful imagery.
Mm-hmm. Wonderful. Yes, your photos are absolutely beautiful, and you always impress me with your photography. It's really nice.
Thank you.
You're so welcome. But so if someone if they don't have access to a wonderful photographer like yourself, are there? I do feel like every yoga teacher, if they're doing it as a career, should have a couple of high resolution pose shots and definitely a high res a headshot. But like, are there any tips that you would give someone to work with what they got? Like any certain tips on like with their iPhone or camera, or any tips you would recommend?
Nowadays, iPhones, the quality of those cameras are great. And if that's all you have access to, by all means, you should use it. As for the photos themselves, composition is always very important. And with yoga photography, some of the aspects of it, it's about the form and your pose. So correct posture and correct pose, really, in a class, you can kind of get away with something not being perfectly aligned, but in a photograph, it's absolutely essential that you see those little details. So having an image that is more focused on your pose, so not having too much clutter in an image, maybe using things like leading lines to draw the viewer in, can really help clean up a yoga image. And then other things like landscapes. So beautiful scenery, whether you're photographing in front of a sunset kind of thing, that can get a little bit trickier with the lighting situation that you've got. So I usually like to work mostly with natural light. And there are apps out there that allow you to actually really change the exposure of a shoot. So if you are shooting during a sunset and the sun is behind you, the person that you're photographing is going to have a tendency to be really dark. Your phone, your exposure wants to expose for the sun. So by brightening up the image, you can create a really nice halo around the person while creating the proper exposure for their body in that moment. Obviously, with the cell phone, you can get little tripods. Things like selfie sticks can a lot of times cause a lot of distortion in an image or just to hold the camera. So if you can find somewhere to put the camera on the ground or elevate it up a little bit so you can work from it is usually the best thing.
Mm-hmm. How do you feel with someone's using apps and whatnots? How do you feel about filters, like all the different filters, and what are your thoughts on that?
I don't use any filters. Most of my work, I've developed my own presets so that my work can have a consistent feel to it. I also edit according to what it is that I'm photographing, whether I want the image to be more brightly lit or I want it to have a dark, moodier feel to it. I will edit for that kind of that emotion that I want to portray. Mm-hmm. As for filters, they're too controlled is the thing. You have very little ability to actually affect that. So most of my work, I try to use my design presets, but if somebody can find a filter that does really work for them, represents their style, I think they should use it. But sometimes, because they're already developed by somebody else, it doesn't necessarily fit in to who you are as an individual, if that kind of makes sense.
Right. Yeah, because sometimes I feel like there's so many filters these days, things can get almost over filtered. But again, if that's like someone's style, if they're using that same filter throughout all of their content, they're maybe being consistent with that, then it might be okay. But I do sometimes feel like things get overly done or overly filtered.
Yes.
But at the same time, I also feel like maybe if there was a one setting or one thing, and that's like a theme throughout their images and pictures, kind of like, as you're saying, like, this is kind of what I have things set at, then maybe having some of those are okay.
Yeah, you never want a filter to completely overpower the photograph. The photograph should stand on its own as a beautiful image representing the subject that's being photographed. And if a filter becomes like overpowers that, the image becomes about the filter compared to the pose.
Mm-hmm.
So,
go ahead.
No, it's okay.
Do you think that people do you think they should stick with iPhones, or do you think that some yoga enthusiasts, if they should invest in a camera, and if so, what type of camera do you think they should invest in?
It really depends on how serious you want to go with it. There are some pretty inexpensive cameras out there. I shoot Sonys, and they've been absolutely great. Allow for a lot of versatility in my shooting. So for somebody that's just starting out, they don't really need to invest in that. If they're doing videos, depending on what the quality of imagery that they want, or the video quality, it's worth it for an investment. But nowadays you can get a great little Sony for $500 with a good lens, get a tripod, and you're pretty much set up to start doing your own videos and your own images.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
So.
And then would you say mostly using natural light, mostly like using natural light as opposed to artificial light?
I think to start out, being able to start to teach your eye how to judge natural light is essential. So to judge the quality of light. Know when it's a soft light, what are the shadows doing on somebody's face, on their body? Are you trying to make a silhouette, or are you trying to kind of add some haze and make it an ethereal kind of photograph? Mm-hmm. So I think that is important there. Right.
And so what would you say if someone was wanting to actually hire someone to for photographer to take photographs of them? They need like some nice high resolution photos. what are some of the things that you would recommend that that teacher look for in hiring someone to take yoga photos for them?
I think obviously they should hopefully have a portfolio. So when you look at their portfolio, look at whether their style represents you as a teacher as well. Because it's great. One of the great things about working with yogis for me is the ability to collaborate with somebody. So that when somebody comes to me as a yoga teacher, we can really work with each other to build the image that they really want. Mm-hmm. So somebody that has obviously a good portfolio, some versatility in their images, if they look like they're really, there's a lot of production to it, then that photographer might be setting up a lot of lights, doing a very complicated kind of setup, and that can be more expensive, first of all. So I think a lot of finding the right photographer for you is about finding somebody that you can really work with. That somebody that you can continue to build a relationship in the future. As a yoga teacher's practice grows, as their audience grows, by continually working with the same photographer can really help your style as a yoga teacher stay consistent, but at the same time grow and expand as your style does.
Right. And that's a good point. And speaking of style, is there any recommendations of what a yoga teacher should or should not wear when taking photographs?
Again, that really just depends on what is trying to be accomplished. So there are great companies out there that are doing some really cool designs in their yoga clothing. And vibrant colors have a tendency sometimes to be a little bit distracting. So I think specifically if this is for like a yoga teacher who is marketing themselves, sticking to some solid, more neutral colors can help the viewer viewing the images be more interested in the teacher and the pose. Nowadays, like leggings and outfits can be so about just the product that when it comes to a yoga teacher wanting to market themselves, we want it to be about their style. So those more neutral, solid colors, maybe some unique patterns, will show off more of the pose and maybe the atmosphere that they're in. But if you have very vibrant tie-dye yoga pants, those pants can kind of end up taking away from the image, unless that is really who the yogi is.
Right.
This is that kind of teacher that is very bright and colorful. Those pants can work, but you could also work with a very bright and colorful scene to represent that side of a yoga teacher.
Right. Right. So overall, you're thinking, especially if it's a landscape, working with the colors within that landscape, having the teacher wear neutral colors and then have it more be about the teacher, the pose, rather than sometimes it sounds like, as you're saying, like the yoga attire can get in the way of that. Unless you actually own a yoga clothing business, then maybe that's actually what you want, is to maybe that's why they have all the bright, like the neon colors and whatever else, is because those will definitely stand out when you're walking down the street, or if there's a photograph, those will definitely pop out.
It's different when it's like when you're working with brands compared to a specific yoga teacher that is trying to market themselves to people.
So, are there any other recommendations you would give to a yoga teacher who just has a camera or their iPhone? Any recommendations? What about angles? What about are there certain angles you think that are better to take photographs for yoga poses?
Usually I think getting a little bit lower than eye level is a great thing. It can kind of make the teacher or whoever's being photographed stand a little bit taller. But if you get too low, it can start exaggerating things. And too high is actually going to end up like compressing the body in the scene. So a lot of it has to do with where you're shooting, what style you are going for. But generally with yoga photography, a lot of it is also the pose. So some poses work really well when you're straight on. Other poses, you might want to focus a little bit more on the length of the legs or how much far somebody is extending. So all those things really help. So, but it also has a lot to do with what the scene is, whether you're photographing with reflection and you want to focus on kind of the reflection of the person in a scene, or if you're pulled way back and you want to just show the person in a simple pose with this giant, magnificent landscape behind them. Sometimes that, by getting a little bit higher, you can include more landscape into that. But for portrait and more like kind of straight on yoga focused poses, being a little bit just kind of bend your knees a little, try a few different angles. I think that's the most important thing, is when I'm working with somebody, I'm very often moving around them a lot. Mm-hmm. So I'm looking for a unique angle. I'm looking for details and aspects to make the image a little bit more powerful mm-hmm. and more creative. Mm-hmm. So a straight on, straightforward yoga shot can be a little neutral sometimes. So right. Looking for something unique in the pose, in the lighting, or the lines in the scene, or wherever you are working, can really help improve the image.
Yeah, I've seen that. Like, it seems like a lot of times, editorial wise, that yoga poses, they tend to be shot at the same level of that pose. Like, you might go down or go up just so you're at the same level, so you kind of nothing gets distorted, as you were saying. But I also feel like, as you're saying, which is kind of nice, to maybe go a little bit lower, or check out different, actually walk around the body, just to give it a little more of an artistic feel, or more of a creative feel, a new view of that particular pose.
I mean, a pose is, there are little details in a pose. For example, if somebody's back, mm-hmm. With like their hands in prayer behind, can be a really nice detail, but they might be, when you've instructed them into a pose, they might be doing something, but you just notice that little detail. Or the wrapping of arms in a bind can be like just kind of very intimate kind of feel that can portray some emotion that will come across in an image.
Mm-hmm. No, that's all really good. And if someone happens to, let's say they can't use natural light, is there something that you would recommend as far as artificial light, or how you would direct that? And if they wanted to actually buy lights, are there any certain lights that you would recommend?
Since most of my work is pretty much natural light, we all pretty much will have access to it. Mm-hmm. So there are, when it comes to like working with an iPhone, there's not much you can really do when it comes to connecting strobes to that, but there are a lot of great, really bright LED lights that you can get, and you can start using for different setups, whether it's in your house or outside on kind of a dark patio. You can use those. Getting with lights does start to get quite a bit more complicated, so it takes a lot more just playing around with things. Mm-hmm. Once you've stepped up and if you get a camera, you can start getting some what are called like speed lights, and they're strobes that you can set off camera, and that way you can add like highlights to the back of people and really make somebody like pop in a scene. Mm-hmm. Specific recommendations I don't really have right now.
No, that's great though, but that's nice. I mean, it sounds like even if you're in a house, if you can first start using, like right now, I'm using natural light. Like it's very bright in here, but it's because there's a window that's right in front of me.
And that's gorgeous light right there. That's a beautiful light, having a big open window.
It's a big open window. Yeah, that's the natural light.
If you have a blank wall with a big white, or not a window next to it, mm-hmm. you're going to have a really nice light coming in. You can put like just a white piece of paper or white piece of foam core on the other side, and they'll actually add some bounce into the scene that can become very elegant lighting very simply.
So you put that over the window itself, or where would you put that?
No, so you have the window, you put it on the opposite side of the window.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, so the light coming through the window will then bounce off of a piece of foam core, a reflector, and then that will actually bounce back onto the person that's being photographed. And that can all be also used like outdoors in natural light. Mm-hmm. If you put the sun behind somebody, mm-hmm. and then you have a reflector in your hand, you can bounce that light back off the reflector onto the person, changing the quality of light that you're able to work with.
Wow, that sounds, that makes sense. Yeah, that makes so. Yeah, like because there's light behind the person, and then you're reflecting light back onto the person using that. Wow, wow. Are there any like other recommendations that you would give to yoga teachers? Anything else that comes to mind?
Scheduling is always difficult with yoga teachers because most of them, their schedules are, they've got classes here and there. So working out a time with a teacher always takes a little bit because I always go for the best light. And that's either early in the morning or late in the evening, depending on where you are photographing. So usually in the evening is when I like to work the most. Being on the West Coast here, we get amazing sunsets out on the ocean or other places. That is pretty much my favorite time to work. So other than that, that's I think kind of all I have.
All right, well, wonderful. How can people find out more about you?
They can check out my website at samuelhendersonphotography.com. They can also find me on Instagram at Samuel Henderson Photography.
And if they're in the Bay Area, they can come and hire you to be their photographer. Is that correct?
Yes, they can.
Wonderful, wonderful. Well, thank you so much, Samuel. I appreciate it.
No problem, Laura.
Yes, and I hope that you enjoy the rest of your day, and I hope to see you very soon.
Yes, we'll plan a shoot.
Right, yeah, and just a little plug in. Yes, Samuel, he did the both covers, 2 cover photos for Yoga Journal Italy and Yoga Journal Singapore. I would say Australia. Singapore. So he's done the photos for that, and he's also done some of the home practice photos. So he's definitely had his both in studio, and even though his specialty is outside of a studio, he's had his work a little bit everywhere, and I can foresee it growing even more in the future. So he's a fantastic photographer. I would highly recommend him, and me personally shooting with him, I think he's fantastic. And I'm not just saying that because he's my friend and he's right here. I really do think he's a very talented individual, and I would recommend him to anyone.
Thank you very much, Laura. Appreciate it.
All right. All right. Have a great evening, great morning, wherever you are, whatever time it is. And yeah, hope to see you all soon.